Hello students, welcome to the lecture on dividend policy, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the concept of dividend policy, understand the MODIGLIANI-MILLER model, discuss the factors influencing dividend policy, explain the forms of dividends, understand the types of dividend policies, explain the Walters model, define dividend policy, stability, and explain the practical aspects of dividend policy. Dividend policy. Let me first tell you the meaning of the term dividend. The term dividend refers to that part of profits of a company which is distributed by the company among its shareholders. It is the reward of the shareholders for investments made by them in the shares of the company. A dividend is nothing but a periodic sharing of profit by the company with its shareholders. A dividend policy is a company's approach to distributing profits back to its owners or stockholders. Once a company makes a profit, management must decide on what to do with those profits. Advantages of stable dividend policy. The following advantages of stable dividend policy are: desire for current income. Some investors, like old persons, widows, etc., desire to get stable current income to meet their living expenses. Removes investors' uncertainty. The stable dividend policy removes uncertainty in investors' mind about dividend payment. The changes or no changes in dividends work as a source of information about firm's profitability. Additional finance. When the company wants to raise additional finance, investors would be willing to buy its shares or debentures. Limitations of stable dividend policy. The greater danger associated with a stable dividend policy is that once it is adopted by the firm, it cannot be changed without seriously affecting the company. Therefore, it is prudent that the dividend rate is fixed at a lower level so that it can be maintained even in years with reduced profits. Modigliani-Miller model. The Modigliani-Miller theorem forms the basis for modern thinking on capital structure. The basic theorem states that in the absence of taxes, bankruptcy costs, and asymmetric information, and in an efficient market, the value of a firm is unaffected by how that firm is financed. It does not matter if the firm's capital is raised by issuing stock or selling debt. It does not matter what the firm's dividend policy is. Factors influencing dividend policy. The factors which influence the dividend policy are: stability of earnings. Industrial units having stability of earnings may formulate a more consistent dividend policy than those having an uneven flow of incomes, because they can predict easily their savings and earnings. Age of corporation. A newly established company may require much of its earnings for expansion and plant improvement and may adopt a rigid dividend policy, while on the other hand, an older company can formulate a clear-cut and more consistent policy regarding dividend. Liquidity of funds. Availability of cash and sound financial position is also an important factor in dividend decisions. Extent of share distribution. A closely held company is likely to get the assent of the shareholders for the suspension of dividend or for following a conservative dividend policy. Needs for additional capital. Companies retain a part of their profits for strengthening their financial position. Trade cycles. Dividend policy is adjusted according to the business oscillations. Government policies. The earnings capacity of the enterprise is widely affected by the change in fiscal, industrial, labor, control and other government policies. Taxation policy. High taxation reduces the earnings of the companies and consequently the rate of dividend is lowered down. Legal requirements. In order to protect the interests of creditors outsiders, the Companies Act 1956 prescribes certain guidelines in respect of the distribution and payment of dividend. Past dividend rates. While formulating the dividend policy, the directors must keep in mind the dividend paid in past years. Ability to borrow. Well-established and large firms have better access to the capital market than the new companies and may borrow funds from the external sources if there arises any need. Policy of control. If the directors want to have control on company, they would not like to add new shareholders and therefore declare a dividend at low rate. Repayments of loan. A company having loan indebtedness are vowed to a high rate of retention earnings unless one other arrangements are made for the redemption of debt on maturity. Time for payment of dividend. It is therefore desirable to distribute dividend at a time when is least needed by the company because there are peak times as well as lean periods of expenditure. Regularity and stability in dividend payment. Dividends should be paid regularly because each investor is interested in the regular payment of dividend. Forms of dividends. The dividends are available in various forms. Cash dividend. The payment of cash dividends to holders of shares of corporations are decided by the board. Shares dividend. A stock dividend is the payment of dividends in shares to existing owners. Types of dividend policies. Accordingly, dividend policies of diverse nature are available. Prominent of them are dealt with. Policy of no immediate dividend. Management follows a policy of paying no immediate dividend in the beginning of its life as it requires funds for growth and expansion. Regular or stable dividend policy. When a company pays dividend regularly at a fixed rate and maintains it for a considerably long time, even though the profits may fluctuate, it is said to follow regular or stable dividend policy. The benefits of stable dividend policy are: it helps in raising long-term finance, as it will enhance the prestige of the company. The price of its shares would remain at a high level. The shareholders develop confidence in management. It makes long-term planning easier. Regular dividend plus extra dividend policy. A firm paying regular dividends would continue with its payout ratio. But when the earnings exceed the normal level, the directors would pay extra dividend in addition to the regular dividend. Irregular dividend policy. This policy is based on the management belief that dividend should be paid only when the earnings and liquid position of the firm warrant it. Regular stock dividend policy. When a firm pays dividend in the form of shares instead of cash regularly for some years continuously, it is said to follow this policy. Regular dividend plus stock dividend policy. This policy is justified when the company wants to maintain its policy of regular dividend and yet it wants to retain some part of its divisible profit with it for expansion. It wants to give benefit of its earnings to shareholders but has not enough liquidity to give full dividends in cash. Liberal dividend policy. It is a policy of distributing a major part of its earnings to its shareholders as dividend and retain a minimum amount as retained earnings. Walter's model. Professor James E. Walter argues that the choice of dividend policies almost always affect the value of the firm. His model is based on the following assumptions. Internal financing. The firm finances all investment through retained earnings, that is, debt or new equity is not issued. Constant return and cost of capital. The firm's rate of return R and its cost of capital K are constant. 100% payout or retention. All earnings are either distributed as dividends or reinvested internally immediately. Infinite time. The firm has infinite life. Valuation formula. P is equal to DIV plus EPS minus DIV R upon K, where P is equal to market price per share, DIV is equal to dividend per share, EPS is equal to earnings per share, DIV minus EPS is equal to retained earnings per share, R is equal to firm's average rate of return, K is equal to firm's cost capital or capitalization rate. K is equal to firm's cost of capital or capitalization rate. Dividend policy stability. Stable dividends have a positive impact on the market price of shares. Stability of dividend means either a constant amount per share or a constant percentage of net earnings. Stable dividend payout ratio. The percentage of the profit that is paid as a dividend is called dividend payout ratio. It shows how mature the company is. The more the dividend payout ratio, the more mature is the organization. Dividend payout ratio is equal to yearly dividend per share upon earning per share, or dividend payout ratio is equal to dividends upon net income. Practical aspects of dividend policy. Recognizing the importance of dividend policy, we are discussing the factors and considerations relevant for formulating the dividend policy. Dividend policy. Two important dimensions for a firm dividend policy are the average payout ratio and how stable should be the dividend for the period of time. Funds requirements. A key factor influencing the payout ratio of a firm is its requirement for funds in the foreseeable future. This may be assessed with the help of financial forecast prepared in the context of long-range planning. Liquidity. Dividends entail cash payments. The liquidity position of the firm has a bearing on the dividend decision. Access to external sources of financing. Generally, a firm which has easy access to external sources of financing may feel less constrained in its dividend decision. Shareholders' preference. The preference of shareholders may influence the dividend payout of the firm. When equity shareholders have greater interest in current dividend as compared to capital gains, the firm may be inclined to follow a liberal dividend payout policy. And if equity shareholders have a strong preference for capital gains, the firm may plow back a larger proportion of its earnings. Summary. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. The term dividend refers to that part of profits of a company which is distributed by the company among its shareholders. A stock dividend is the payment of dividends in shares to existing owners. Stability of dividend means either a constant amount per share or a constant percentage of net earnings. Walter argues that the choice of dividend policies almost always affect the value of the firm.